The first of those lessons I have is that partisanship infected our policy in Iraq. This is a picture of me out at Al-Fa Palace on September 11th, actually. I've gone out there because I've been assigned to work on a interagency review of the campaign plan to identify what are going to be the decisive points in our campaign over the next 9 to 12 months. Now, you'll notice I said that my primary duty was to develop a model of the election. This was a side quest. Yeah, I quickly got put on a side quest to do something else, which is very important. But I'm out there to meet with Red Team, who is, those of you in the military, you know what Red Team is, those of you not. Red Team is basically a group of people that are supposed to be inside the heads of the adversary, inside the heads of the enemy. What are they thinking? What might they be doing? How are we going? How are they adjusting to what we're thinking of? And what Red Team wanted to do, when I was meeting with everybody for this campaign plan review, the idea was identify key things you think ought to happen. The process basically of this is things that might contribute to our victory or not contribute to our victory, depending whether they happen. And then we're going to string them all together in this big spaghetti chart of what could influence what. If this happens, makes this more likely. If this doesn't happen, makes this more likely. And all these complicated things to get disentangled, which I do not have a copy of because that one was classified, and so I don't have any copies of whatever that was. It was a very fascinating little chart. Red Team's contribution was they wanted us to put the re-election of George W. Bush as a key point in our campaign. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that because, well, I'm a twice passed over major. I'm like, what are you going to do to me? Send me home? But I'm not going to do that. No, this is really, really important. The commander thinks this is important. I don't know whether the commander thought this was important. I'll make that clear. I don't know what the commander's thinking. I know Red Team is telling me the commander thinks George Bush's re-election is very important to this war. I don't put it in the plan. And maybe it got added later, but I don't think it did. So fine. That's partisanship, kind of a little bit of a distraction from what we're supposed to be doing, worrying about that. And if that had gone through, though, it could have changed the kinds of things we're paying attention to. A little bit after that, though, Red Team is now saying, well, okay, you're not putting in the campaign plan. Their concept of what they think the enemy is going to do is what they call it a Ramadan offensive. This is a very creative riff on the Tet Offensive from Vietnam, which was seen as a way of turning American public opinion against the war and such and such. But their endpoint of the Ramadan Offensive, their purpose that they saw for it, was that the enemy wanted to make sure George W. Bush would not get reelected. So therefore, they were going to do things that would make him less popular, that would then encourage him to lose the election, which would apparently cause the enemy to win. I didn't really quite follow that line of thinking. My bosses at least thought enough that we came up with a whole bunch of what we call strategic surprise scenarios, which were ways the enemy could kill a whole bunch of us in a really spectacular way before the election. This was a really, really cheerful thing to be working on, especially as the things I was working on would partially come true while I was working on them. So that was a little bit disturbing. But this was partisanship because I don't think that was the goal of the enemy, and it took time to work on these projects that could have been better spent on something else. I mean, yeah, basically, are they going to try to kill a whole bunch of us? Well, yeah. I mean, that's their job. They're the enemy. They're there to kill us. That's their purpose to a certain extent. So why are we spending the time working on this? A third, right after this, a proposal was put forward in October, right in September, beginning of October, that maybe what we should do is announce a plan to withdraw forces after the United Nations resolution expires, after all the Iraqi elections in about 2006. And kind of what spoke in favor of this was, yeah, that might make the current government seem more popular. It might keep our allies on board. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But there are pros and cons to this. It may not have been a good idea. It may have been a good idea. I don't know. But we kicked it around for a while. It went into Washington, and the word back from the defense team there was that no, announcing withdrawal plan would undercut the president's campaign messages, and therefore don't even spend any more time thinking about this because the president will never endorse any plan that undercuts. He's negotiating with terror. I don't know. Again, it wasn't clear to me. Those of you that follow me on Blue Sky or whatever, I think this is today's note was like, why not? what John Kerry's basically saying the war is going to go on forever. If George Bush announces that he's got a plan to end the war in about 18 months, okay, well, what's John Kerry going to campaign on now? We're going to win the war. The president said so. And then the final one is a little more circumstantial. So I was assigned to work on the model of the campaign plan. And then the next day I was given three other tasks. And one of those was to evaluate which city in northern Iraq should we attack this fall, which is an interesting way to put a tasking. It wasn't whether we should attack any cities, but which one should we attack. And I was the third person who'd been assigned this task. I was told to do this without consulting with any of the other people who had worked on it. So it's an independent assessment. And my conclusion from this was that we should probably, have our operation occur in Baghdad. But the worst idea would be to do it in Fallujah, because Fallujah was the highest risk place to go and produced the least gain in terms of improving security and reducing violence throughout Iraq. Reaction to this was highly negative from Colonel Vortex. I would tell you what he said to me about it, but I promise not to use that language. He dropped F-bombs like he thought he was Curtis LeMay over Tokyo or something like that. It was kind of harsh, but I was told early September, well, that's the wrong answer, and I'm stupid, and I don't know anything about this. And like, well, why did you give me the assignment? Like, I agree with you. I probably don't know anything about this, but like, hey, it's my job. But it's already been decided. Okay, why do you ask me to do this? And it's going to happen soon. And we were all told very soon after that. This is still mid-September. This attack is going to happen soon, any day now. And as you may know, if you remember Iraq history, the attack on Fallujah did not happen until the 8th of November, which is about 4 days after George Bush's reelection was secured. Now, so what I'm saying is conjecture. We had launched the first battle of Fallujah in the beginning of April, 5 days after 4 Blackwater contractors were killed in Fallujah. Their bodies were mutilated. They were hung from a bridge. It was a terrible atrocity. It took us 4 days to organize an attack, or 5 days to organize an attack, go into Fallujah, which is basically going fairly well as an attack, except that we terminated that attack because the Iraqis were pretty mad about the whole thing. For some reason, it took us almost 2 months after this attack decision had been made to launch the attack on Fallujah. Why? I don't know entirely, but I do wonder whether or not some of that had to do with this is a risky operation, and launching an attack now in September, into October, that's not real good timing, because what if it doesn't go well? And so 5 days after George Bush is reelected, the attack happens. And by this time, that attack was a very bad idea. I think it probably would have been a bad idea in September, but everybody knew this attack was happening. Everybody in Iraq knew this attack was happening. All the most important people had left Fallujah, and what the enemy did from a strategic perspective was they took advantage of our focus on Fallujah to attack in Mosul, to attack in Baghdad, overrun police stations, overrun Iraqi military facilities and steal weapons, steal uniforms, and all that kind of stuff. And of course, the attack on Fallujah, whatever the justification was, it's not like it ended violence in Iraq. And the other thing I'd said, if we're going to do attack in Fallujah, is if you're going to do this, do it soon. Whatever we're going to do, we got to get this over with before the middle of October when Ramadan starts, because we're not supposed to launch a war during Ramadan. It's somewhat inequitable about attacking during Ramadan, but we're not supposed to attack anybody during Ramadan. And I said, if we wait until after the middle of November when Ramadan ends, then there's not going to be much time before the election to kind of recover from this. Instead, we launched the attack a few days before Eid al-Fitr, so during Ramadan, right before the kind of the feasting days at the end of the month, which was probably the worst possible timing to do this, other than, anyway. So partisanship and effective policy. A lot of people in the military organizations I was in were very focused on the re-election of George W. Bush. This distracted us from what we were doing. It possibly even led us to delay the attack on Fallujah, whether it was a conscious decision or just a unconscious. We got to be real careful about this. And oh, gee, look, it just happened. They just waited until after this is all over with. I don't know. It's that part is conjecture. But as a lesson, I am concerned about this kind of thing continuing in Okay, yes, 6:30 to 7:30. I think I have 7 minutes to go. I'm concerned about this today. This happened, this happened in Vietnam. This isn't new, but I'm concerned about today the emphasis on loyalty to the president, on loyalty to a political party coming out of the White House, coming out of other parts of the national security establishment. I am concerned that military actions could be taken with an eye more towards the political interests of the leadership than the national security interests of the country. I'm concerned that if that becomes explicit, that we'll talk about this in a later lesson a little bit, but if it becomes clear that you don't have a route to promotion if you're not a, you know, use the party name, if you're not a Republican, if you're not MAGA, whatever it might happen to be. And again, all this stuff may go away in a few years, but if that becomes the trend, then people who are not like that aren't going to want to join the military. And it becomes self-fulfilling and self-reinforcing. But at some point, we risk becoming like the kind of militaries that we used to fight, because this kind of political angle was what afflicted the Soviet military. It still affects the Russian military, which isn't really very good. They're big, and they're certainly willing to die, but they're big. They've affected the Iraqi military. Political loyalty is not necessarily going to get you the best national security thought, the best national security strategy. Now, I'm somewhat hopeful. I'm hearing that the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff is raising a bunch of questions about whether or not this war in Iran that's probably going to happen is really actually a good idea. And I'm glad to hear that. And I'm glad to hear he still has his job. And I hope he still has his job. But I am worried about that kind of thing. Partisanship has no place in military strategy. Political decision to go to war, absolutely. But if we're like deciding what to do during the war, I don't think that's where that belongs. So that's one lesson that I drew from that.